Hello, students. Welcome to Chapter 1, An Introduction to Medical Terminology. As I said before, I'm Dr. Petzold, and I'm going to provide some of the different types of videos for this, just so that you can get a little bit of a basis as to some of the background before we actually get into the specifics. The way that your textbook is set up is that the first couple of chapters are all about the basics of medical terminology, and then it goes into individual things and specific terms. In these videos, I figure it's not worth it for me to just read something to you and then say what the definition is. Because that's not worth your time, it's not worth my time. You can just read things. So, but I am going to go over some of the basics so that you at least have some sort of idea as to how things could end up working for you in this class. When we're breaking down medical terminology, there is a fundamental word structure to medical words. Generally, they're built from multiple sources, and they're jammed together in a fairly predictable type of way. So as long as you know what makes up a medical word, meaning the prefixes, the roots, and the suffixes, and any type of weird alterations that might need to happen inside of there, then you can figure out how to actually say what all of these things are. Now, granted, it probably would help you if you knew a little bit of Latin or Greek, and we'll get to that in a couple of slides, but overall you can kind of break things down and then figure out what things are actually talking about, and that'll help you when you end up going and seeing these different types of words in different classes in the future. The way that your book is going to use abbreviations, it's going to build off of a couple of different things. So it's going to use the word P, or the letter P, for prefix. A prefix is the start of a word. So that means like antibody is against the body, or versus body, against. Anti, prefix. So that's the start of the word. And it alters the meaning of the word the same way that you have anti. So if you have anti-cold, that means you're hot. It's the opposite of cold. A combining form is changing the root, generally by adding an O, to combine two different roots together. So that's taking two different words, adding an O in between-ish, and jamming them together. Your book uses R for the root, or the foundation from which the word derives. And then you add the prefixes and suffixes onto that. The suffix is the end bit of the word that also alters the meaning of the word, and generally it's the easiest type of thing to actually decode. So if you have something like itis at the end of a word, that means that it's inflammation of something. So bursitis is inflammation of the bursa. Bursa are the things that you crack when you're cracking your knuckles. So bursitis is inflammatory joints, things along those lines. So that's the itis. It helps you quickly decode what the word is actually talking about. So that's the suffix, which your book uses S. Oftentimes, medical terminology is either going to use Greek or Latin, and then there are also going to be Greek or Latin prefixes and suffixes. So the roots and everything else is going to be the prefixes or suffixes. Unfortunately, sometimes you're going to have the combination of the two. Or they're going to be eponyms. Epa or ep, same as epi, is going to be on top of or outside of, so that means that it's going to be outside of that name. It's going to be from somebody or some place. So a place or a person derivation, generally after dead people who discovered whatever it may be. Generally, as a whole, most but not all terms for the body originate from Latin words, and most but not all terms for broader biology and diseases originate from Greek words. So that's one way that you can kind of think about these types of things. Unfortunately, because we are talking about spelling in Latin and Greek, it doesn't necessarily use the same type of spelling conventions as English does, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And there's some things like the words adduct and abduct that are going to mean two completely different things. Adduct means bring together, abduct means bring apart. So just changing one letter can vastly change what a word actually means. Even more, especially with Greek, there's a lot of strange spellings and silent letters, and we're going to go through a couple of those here. So if you have a GN, then it's going to, or GN, KN, MN, or PN, it's going to be pronounced like an N by itself, like knuckle. It's KNU, and that makes the knuckle type of noise. PS sounds like an S. PT sounds like a T. So psychiatrist and ptosis. Otherwise, you can also have the same old types of things like a PH meaning F. So then you get the beautiful spelling that is phlegm, PHLEGM with a silent G in there. So know these, it'll help you out. If you happen to see essentially a P in front of something, normally you just ignore what the P sounds like unless it's by itself or there's a vowel immediately after it. So if you see a P consonant, then you just pronounce the consonant. Same thing with a consonant N, you just pronounce the N. Some prefixes and suffixes that are normally misspelled or confused: anti, meaning before or forward, anti, ecto, outside of, endo, within, hyper, above, excessive, hypo, below, deficient, inter, between, intra, within, para, beside, per, through, peri is around the outside or like a perimeter, outside of, pre, before, pro, also before, but in a different way, and it's super awkward. Super is above, and supra, which is also above. Poesis is the formation. Ptosis, meaning prolapse or drooping. Ptysis, spitting. Rage, or raj, to burst forth. Ragia is bursting forth also. Raphi, suture. Rhea, flow. Rexus, rupture. Scope, instrument. Scopy, visual examination of. Tome, instrument to cut. Tomy is an incision. Tripsy is crushing, and trophy is nourishment and development. Once again, this is one of the reasons why I'm not just reading out words, because it's kind of boring. Different types of endings change when you make them plural. So if you have an A, like in bursa, then it makes it so that it's an AE, which is pronounced bursae. AX, like thorax, changes to ACES, or adds an EX because it makes more sense in English. EN changes to INA. You'll see that in foramen versus foramina. Foramina versus foramina. IS, as in crisis, will change to ES, or IDES, or an A. And that all is dependent on whether it's Latin or Greek. IX changes to ICES, NX to GES, ON to A, UM to A, US to I, Y to I. And then you add an ES. There are pronunciation guides in your book. They will include hyphens to mark syllables and different types of stress accents. A single stress accent is called a primary accent, and that's used within a syllable that has the strongest stress. A double accent mark is a secondary accent and is used with syllables that have less stress. And it'll make more sense when you end up actually getting into it. You'll also see some diacritics. Diacritics are marks that are placed over or under vowels to indicate the long or the short time, to indicate the long or the short sound of the vowel. A long vowel generally says its name. So if you have a long I, it says I. If you have a long A, it says A. As opposed to a short vowel sound, which has the traditional other type of vowel sound that you have. So a macron is a bar on top of a vowel. So it's a long vowel sound like the I in sign. A breve or a breve is a semicircle that's over a vowel. And that's a short vowel sound that's found in both the A and the E in arrest. You might also see a schwa, which is an upside down E, and it's an unstressed vowel sound, like the E in bowel. So, and vowel for that matter. So it's a l type of noise, or hall, where there is a different type of noise there that would be not present if the vowel wasn't there, but it's just a not stressed vowel sound. There's a lot of stuff in your book about medical records and a large number of different types of things about medical records and acronyms. I'm not going to go through all of them because it's exhaustive, and I figured that that is not necessarily a good use of my time or your time. Most of them can be memorized if you spend some time with it. A tip that is helpful for me when I was learning about them is to write out everything in full and then read it out loud. Write out the shortened form, either the abbreviation or the acronym, and then say the full words while you are writing it out. That should help you out. And then keep doing that a couple times with each one of them, 2 or 3 times until you figure out what it actually is. Note cards work, or flashcards work really well with that as well. One final thing that is more or less, you'll see it come up in the news and other things like that fairly often. It's HIPAA, HIPAA. And it has to do with health records and insurance. So that's what HIPAA actually is, but it's the protection of your health records. So just a couple different notes. And then I am going to post this online as well, but there are some potentially useful aids for pronunciation. The Merck Pronunciation Guide, unfortunately, it sounds very fake and computery, but it has a good amount that's in your book. The Voice Foundation has a really good pronunciation guide, but it's not as medical and only has about 400 or so terms, so it's not going to be as useful. And then there's also How to Say, which is sometimes wonderful and sometimes not so much, and it really depends on who you have who's actually reading that individual word. So it's going to be dependent on the actual person or the source of that reading. Speaking of, you also need to make sure that you are using American or English pronunciation and spelling, not necessarily a British pronunciation, because there are some differences in both pronunciation and spelling. That's it for this video. I hope that you found most of this fairly useful, and we'll catch you at the next one.